We're in Hebrews chapter 3. And starting about, we talked about exhortation last week quite a bit and stuff. So we'll just start with number 12 and to kind of get a review. Let's go ahead and have a prayer so we can get started. Father, thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for the change in weather that we're about to experience. We pray, Father, that you'll keep us safe in the storms. We pray that everyone will be safe from flooding or anything like that. We pray also that you'll be with us in class tonight. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to study more of your word. As we dig into Hebrews, Father, we pray that we will be encouraged to continue on in the faith, to have boldness to come to you in prayer and the times that we have in need. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Okay, chapter 3, verse 12 says, "Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God." So the idea here, the evil heart of unbelief, is expressed in departing God. So obviously it's not okay to have an unbelieving heart that doesn't cause you to depart. But this is the extreme, and this is what he's fighting against the entire time. This entire book really is leaving God. So that's the answer to verse 12. What was the warning that they needed to listen to? And he says, beware. So what's the end result of people who leave God? It's worse for them than they'd ever known. That's right. They would have been better off never having come to the truth than coming in to reject it. A lot of reasons for that, perhaps, but I don't think the least of them is the idea of the knowledge it will have. Jesus in Luke chapter 16 talked about the rich man and Lazarus, and you remember how the rich man was asking for a drop of water to cool his tongue in the flames. Do you remember Abraham's response? What he said to him? Sorry? That's true. That's true. He said, remember. Remember how you lived. And I think that'll be one of the worst parts of it, is people have come to God, and they had salvation in the palm of their hand, and they threw it away so that they could have basically a bowl of soup. That can't be good. And when we are there, I think we're going to remember all those opportunities that we squandered. But that's a different story. So anyway, he's saying, let's not be there. Let's not find out. Beware lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily, what was called today. We spent a lot of time talking about that last week. And according to, number 13, what does this evil heart of unbelief cause people to do? I've been saying that. We're going to be leaving God, right? Is it possible to be saved if you don't give up your evil heart? If you don't. Does that question make any sense? It doesn't make any sense to me. If you don't give up your evil heart, is it possible for you to be saved? Right. That's his point, right? You've got to embrace the faith. You got to embrace it and make it part of your life. And I was reading it backwards for that. I don't know why. It didn't make much sense to me for some reason. If you have an evil heart of unbelief, does that mean that you were never saved to begin with? No. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, the next question is, if someone is not saved, how could he be departing from the living God? He says he's departing from an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. All of us here believe that we can be lost once we're saved, but there are a lot of people who believe that once you're saved, you can never be lost, no matter what. And this is a great verse to talk. There are a lot of verses to talk about. This is a great one to talk about, to ask them the question, Does that mean that they were never saved? Can you leave God if you're never with him? And of course, the answer is no. You can't leave God if you've never been with him. So they had to be with God in order to walk away from God. And that's scary. But you know, the great thing about this is we need to remember, John chapter 10 says that he's the good shepherd, that those who know his voice will come out. He'll lead them to pastures. No one can take us out of his hands, right? So when we're talking about departing from the faith, it's a little scary in the abstract, like he's talking about here, but it's not really that. It shouldn't be that scary for us, because this is not something that you wake up one day and you accidentally find yourself outside the realm of God's forgiveness. It's not something that accidentally happens. It is something that we decide to turn away from God. Now, the scary part is that most of the time it doesn't happen with a simple decision. We wake up one day and say, I'm just done with this. Yesterday I was a great Christian, faithful, love God, but today I don't think I want to do it anymore. I'll just quit. That's not how it works. We wouldn't want to do that. But so how does it work? He's already talked about that, right? Yeah, Linda? Yeah, you get so discouraged to the point where you're pulled away. Yeah, you're right. He also talked about the fact that we drift, right? And that discouragement is one of the ways that we can drift. And before long, we may be in places. I've been there. You all probably have too, where you wake up one day and you're like, "How did I get so far? And where did I go wrong?" And it's hard to point your finger at one specific place, but it has to do with unbelief and probably discouragement. That's the biggest for most of us. We get easily discouraged. Okay, so number 17. What are we to do to help ensure that we aren't hardened through sin? That'd be verse 13. We are to help exhort one another. You know, when you encourage someone else, you are also going to be encouraged. I don't know how many times I've gone to visit someone. I do not like going to the hospital to visit, because whatever ailment they have, I walk away thinking I've got it. I'm just that kind of mind. And Carla knows this very well. I'm around someone who has a stomach ache, my stomach's going to be hurting. And I know that about myself. I don't like that, but I can't help it. I'm around somebody with poison ivy, I start itching all over. I mean, it's just, I'm mental. But so it's difficult for me to go visit people who are hurting or sick. But, you know, every time I've gone, I come away feeling much better than when I went. And in fact, I probably feel better than I made them feel. They probably made me feel better than I made them feel. Because that's the way it works. If you're giving, is what you receive. And so we try our best to encourage. So how do you encourage someone? What's the best thing you can do to encourage someone? Or to start, to have an idea of it? Talk to them. That's right. Offer a prayer. You know, the best thing you can do is what you would want somebody to do to you. More than likely, that's what they are gonna need too. It may not work all the time, but no. Listen, yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. In fact, I have a sermon coming up on, I think it might be this Sunday night, on how to listen. But that's very important. Sometimes just letting people talk, but sometimes just your presence is good, right? So when Job's friends went to him, he had 7 friends. What did they do at first? Or 3 friends, sorry. They sat by him for 7 days, and they didn't say a word. And, you know, that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. They feel like, I got to be filling in the gaps. But you know what? If you're mourning, you're having problems, you're having difficulties, and somebody's going through that and they're being really quiet, what are they doing? They're processing it. They're trying to figure it out. They don't need you interrupting them in their process. They have to process it. We all have to process things, and sometimes it takes us longer or shorter depending on us and the situation. But as someone is processing it, that doesn't mean that we can never say anything. I'm saying there's not silence in the room if you're there silent, because I guarantee you their brains are not silent. They're working through stuff. So they don't feel uncomfortable. You're the one that does. And what we have to say about that is don't make someone else uncomfortable because you want to feel comfortable. Don't talk to them if they don't want it. And how do you know if they want it or not? They'll usually say something if they want to talk. Usually. And now you have to know the person, right? Some people need to be drawn out. I get that. But yeah, did you have a question? Or oh, you just scratched your ear? You did. Yeah, so that's right. So and you listen to her, so she encourages you because you're hearing her. Yeah. That's amazing. That's good. You know, humans and emotions are very interesting to study. Do you know that if someone is feeling something and you're around them, you'll start feeling what they feel? To a certain degree. Some people are more susceptible to that than others, but you will. So if you don't know how someone's feeling, go sit beside them for a while. I don't know how that works. I don't know if we're picking up cues from, their demeanor or what, because we're really good at interpreting that kind of stuff, or some of us are better than others. But for whatever reason, it's the same thing. It's like, have you ever had this happen when you're asleep and you have little children in the house, and they sneak up beside you in bed and they just stare at you? Does it wake you up? Yes, and it's not the noise. They sit there and stare until you realize somebody's staring at me. And then you wake up. I don't know how many times it happened. It always happened to Carla because they did it to me once, and I was having at the time I was having night terrors. And my son just happened to do that, and he was staring at me, and I woke up with my hand on his shirt because I thought he was going to hurt me. And then I realized what happened, and I let him go, of course, but he never did it again. He always went to Carla's side. Anyway, so what I'm saying is there's something about us that we can kind of sense what other people are, and some people are better at it than others. And I can't explain it. I don't know how. So get around people and just be quiet and encourage them as much as you can that way. And then he says in verse 14, if we become partakers of Christ, if we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. All right, so let's see here. Where are we at? What is the nature of number 18? What is the nature of this sin that can harden our hearts? That's verse 13, actually. It's deceitful, right? I think sometimes we underestimate the deceitfulness of it, especially if we play with it. And what I mean by that is we put ourselves in situations where we think, I can handle this. It's no big deal. You might can. And you might have an off day, and then you won't be able to. Not only that, you may put yourself in a situation that other people see you put yourself in who won't be able to handle it when they go into the same situation that you were in. So we got to be really careful about the deceptiveness of sin. Do you think that Eve was just a dummy? That she was deceived because she was just stupid? No. But she was deceived because Satan has a way of playing on us, playing on our emotions, playing on our thoughts, and makes it very, very appealing. And yes? Yeah. That's a good point. That we need to recognize reality for what it is, right? And that is that we need to recognize we have someone out to get us, and he wants nothing more than our destruction. He would love that, and He is at work. It's dangerous when we don't recognize that idea because we can be susceptible to him. I don't know how everything works. I couldn't tell you how temptations enter into your mind, except for the fact that James says it comes from our own lusts. But Satan has a hand in it somehow, and I don't know how, but I don't need to know how to know that I can resist it. I just need to know that God has set it up so that I can't be tempted beyond what I can handle, but I've got to look for that way of escape that's been promised. So, yeah, good point. All right, number 19. What is required in verse 14 for us to be partakers of Christ? To be steadfast, right? Is that? Oh, verse 14. I was looking at 19. We are become partakers if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. Okay, what does it mean, the beginning of our confidence?
I think that you're almost never stronger in Christ than whenever you first believe. To me, I think that as confident as you are whenever you take on Christ in baptism, and He's coming, you believe He's the Son of God, you can hold that kind of confidence you had from the beginning when you built your faith until the end. You can never lose how much you believe.
Right. You never lose what you had at the beginning. Yeah. And it will grow and mature, but it is very strong at first. You're right. And so this confidence that we have to hold the confidence steadfast to the end. What's the word steadfast mean? Does your translation say something different? Hold fast? Constant. Yeah. The idea is that we are continuing on in the work and consistent. And that's really difficult for most humans, isn't it? That we're very consistent people. We're not very consistent people. And we're creatures of habits, but we also fight habit for some reason. Maybe I'm the only one that does that. But being consistent over a long period of time is very difficult. It takes focus, it takes vision, it takes motivation. There's lots of things that go into that, but that's part of what it means to be a Christian. Is we're trying to endure and hold on to what we've been given. And that's one of the reasons we have each other, because most people can't make it by themselves. In fact, probably no one can to a great degree. But I've met some people who it seemed like they could stand by themselves for a long, long time, and other people, they get away from Christians and they're already, 5 minutes in, they're already caught up in their elbows in sin. That's some people are that way. Paul? Yeah, that's true. We can get so caught up in the mysteries, so to speak, that we think that we start doubting everything. I agree with that. And, there's a lot of complexity to Christianity. There's a lot of complexity and depth in all the lessons that we can learn in here, but it really is simple. We love God and keep His commandments. And when we do that, we're following God. And if we don't do that, we're not following God. And that's a good point. All right, so let's see here. Verse 15, while it is said today, if you will hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. What's the rebellion that he's talking about here? We actually have already seen these verses in the previous 7 through 10 or 7 through 11. What is the rebellion? The rebellion is specifically related to verse 9, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. Children of Israel in the wilderness wanderings. Yeah, this is what he's referring to when they were testing God, right? And so this is coming from. Where is this coming from? Let me see the passage here. Psalm 95, right? And we talked about that last week a little bit. It's just a quotation or a statement telling what happened in the book of Deuteronomy, right? They were wandering around for 40 years, because of their unbelief. And why was it 40? I mean, we know because it was a 40 days that the spies spied out the land, but what was the intention of that 40 years? What was supposed to happen? New generation, right. So all the people 20 and up that were part of Israel, when they rejected God and said, we're going to go back to Egypt, they all had to fall in the wilderness first. And as their corpses fell, they got closer and closer to the promised land. And so that's what he's talking about here. So when he says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, what do you think his purpose is in saying that? What do you think the message is in verse 15? What's he emphasizing? Sorry? Don't give up. There's a really interesting word here, today. What does that mean when he says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts? Don't wait. Yep. You know what it makes me also think of is what Jesus said about worry. What did he say? This day has enough trouble of its own. Don't worry about tomorrow. You focus on it. So we need to be present in the day. That helps to avert worry, but it also helps us in times of discouragement and temptation. So if you are overwhelmed with discouragement, the worst thing you can do is start worrying about listing all the stuff that's going to go wrong tomorrow. Just deal with today, right? Just deal with today. And if we will deal with today, we can do a whole lot more than we realize. And in fact, sometimes it's not even today. Maybe sometimes it's this hour. What do I have going on right now? And if we can focus on that, on the smaller terms, and not worry about the rest, we can't do anything about the rest of it anyway, can we? We have to deal with it as it comes to us. And what looks like is coming down the pipe toward us does not mean that it's going to get here, because it can be diverted, it can change, it can even get worse for all we know. So the only thing that we can do is deal with what we're focused on our plate right now. I think that's part of what he's saying. Today, if you will hear his voice, don't harden your heart. And so is hardening of our hearts a decision that we make? To some degree, it is. What's the decision that we make? I don't think anyone makes the decision, I'm going to harden my heart. That's not what we decide. Yeah. That's true. So we start looking out for ourselves instead of looking out for the things of God. That's a decision that we make. So there may be a lot of things going into that idea of how we choose to have our hearts hardened, but it is a decision that we make, and sometimes it's a decision of what we decide what we won't do. That is, we won't seek help, or we won't reach out, or we won't go to God in prayer, or the first thing that happens when we have trouble and trials in life is usually we stop praying, and that's the worst thing we can do. But if we refuse to go to God in prayer, how are we going to be helped through it, right? And some of these things, of course, God will do for us, but he won't do unless we ask. And if you want to live your life in misery, he will let you do it. If you want to live your life without joy, he will let you do it. You can't help but do what you want to do because God will let you do it. In fact, he'll help you sometimes. So he definitely will give you what you want related to those kinds of things. Then he goes into verse 16, who having heard rebelled. Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Okay, so here are questions from this. Look at verse 18. To whom did he swear that they would not enter the land? To those who did not obey. It's not to those who were discouraged. It's to those who didn't obey. And discouragement is what caused them to disobey, but they weren't kept out because they felt bad or they were discouraged. If you have been discouraged and you still do what you're supposed to be doing, you don't have anything to worry about, right? Discouragement is not a sin. It's definitely a dangerous place to be, but it's not sinful. And we need to be careful of that, because if we, again, maybe I'm the only one that ever does this. If I've ever gotten discouraged, I tend to beat myself up. Have you ever done that before? And I'm going to beat myself up because I guess I don't deserve this stuff anyway. I guess I'm just a terrible person, and it's amazing what your brain will tell you if you let it. And so anyway, we have to consider that. He was angry with them, not because they were discouraged, but because they didn't obey. So is obedience related to their entry into the land? It's pretty obvious. And the land was given to them based on what? The promise that God made to Abraham. It wasn't because they were such great, righteous people. God expected righteousness from them, but their gift was not based on how good they were. There were people, when they went into Canaan, there were people still worshiping some of the gods that came out of Egypt. They weren't perfect by any means, but God expected them to be faithful, and He also was patient with them to allow growth and that kind of thing. Okay, so verse 18, number 23. Verse 18 says they could not enter because they did not obey. Verse 19 says they could not enter because of unbelief. How do disobedience and unbelief relate to one another? Yeah. If you don't believe, you're not going to obey anyway, right? And disobedience is a synonym for unbelief. I need to look it up because I forgot to look it up. Let me see if I can look this up real quick, because I have something I was going to say about this, and then I haven't checked, so I better not say it. Hebrews. I'm not Googling it, by the way. I have a phone that has an app on it for Bible. 3:19. The word, the word in verse 18 where it says that they were disobedient, that they did not obey. The word obey there is a word that means unbelief. But they translate it disobey. That's the point, is disobedience and unbelief are synonyms. They mean the same thing, basically. So if you're disobeying, it's unbelief. That's the reason you don't obey. And so anyway, that's important, I think, in this context. So what's the overall message of this chapter related to obedience? All of chapter 3, really, lots of stuff before that too. Yes. Right. That if we want to make it to heaven, we want to be faithful to God, we're going to have to look at what God said to do and do it. He starts off about this contrast between Moses and Jesus. And he didn't contrast in the sense that he said Jesus obeyed and Moses didn't. He said Moses was also faithful. But the emphasis was that Jesus was superior because he's the one that created the house that Moses lived in. And so the contrast was in their character, their nature. But he starts off talking about the faithfulness that was at the foundation of everything, Old Testament and New Testament. And then based on that, we are told that we have to be faithful as well. We need to make sure that we are following God's law and doing what he wants us to do. Okay, so that brings us into chapter 4. Does anybody have any comments or questions about 3? That's right. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Mm-hmm. There's no way around that. If you're going to love God, if you're going to say you love God, then you better obey God. 1 John mentions that a lot. I have friends who tell me all the time how much they love God. And I say, well, I see how they live, and I see the things that they say, and it doesn't really match. Like, you say you love God, but this is what you're doing. So that shows me you don't love God. And that's harsh. That's hard to hear, because, the reason that we don't obey God is because we have unbelief. We don't love God as much as we should, right? So if I'm giving in to sin, there's only one real reason that I'm doing that. It's because I would rather do that than follow God. And that's hard to hear, but that's the truth. And that's what we have to continually remind ourselves. We're not fooling anyone. We're fooling ourselves often, but we're not fooling God. We're not fooling anyone else either. That doesn't give room for us to be judgmental of each other. I saw you make a mistake, so you must not love God. That's not the point at all, because we all make mistakes, right? But we need to be hard on ourselves and recognize that God expects a standard that continues to grow and develop. He can't demand perfection of us. He wouldn't have sent Jesus if that were the case. But he does demand that we continue to grow and develop and mature as Christians, or we're going backwards. All right, chapter 4, the promised rest. This is a lot of what we've been talking about. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this place, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains that some must enter it, and those to whom it was first preached did not enter it because of disobedience, again he designates a certain day, saying in David, today, after such a long time, as it has been said, today if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not have afterward have spoken of another day. There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his. Okay, so this is an interesting passage. He's making a little bit of play on words, which is very common in the Scriptures. Based on Hebrews chapter 3, 16 through 19, which we just went through, what would be the condition or the cause for the condition in chapter 4 and verse 1? Unbelief or disobedience. Yeah, that would be the cause of it, that of not being able to enter into or we come short of it, right? That's what mine says, lest any of you seem to have come short of it. Does everyone's translation say this same thing? What does it mean to come short of it? You're almost there, right? Yeah, and we're almost there, and we just peter out at the end, and we don't make it. Yeah. True. Yeah. Trust. That's the key. The difference between believing in God and believing God is the trust factor, right? Because a lot of people believe in God, but they don't trust him. Yeah, very good point. How was the gospel preached to the people in the wilderness? It says in verse 2, indeed, the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. True. How does that relate to the gospel? Okay. Yeah, but he says the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. What gospel was preached to them? They were baptized in the wilderness, well, in the Red Sea when they crossed over. There are a lot of parallels. The gospel was not literally preached. The gospel being the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The message of Jesus was not literally preached to them, but the good news was preached. Okay, so what was the outcome of God taking these people out of Egyptian slavery and planting them in Canaan? What was the intended outcome? True, yeah. Yes. So now they're coming out and they recognize that they're a nation, a people of God. All right, what else? Think a little bit longer term. What was the ultimate end of having Israel as a state? The what? Right, through Jesus. Yeah, that was the ultimate design of having Israel to begin with. And what was that? What was that? That design based upon? A promise made to whom? Abraham. What was the promise? All the nations of the earth will be blessed through his seed. Galatians teaches us that seed is whom? You remember? Jesus. So ultimately, it's about Jesus. The good news for them was that they can be people of God, and they didn't understand everything related to the Messiah coming, but they had promises of the Messiah coming. There's a thread there that they can see if they were looking for it. And even if they didn't get it, they still had the message, right? And the law of Moses was a way to help ensure that the Messiah came in the proper time, the proper way. So it all relates to that. The gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word that they heard did not benefit them. So why did the words from Moses not benefit them? They didn't listen. Yeah, they didn't want them to. So that's a really good answer. They just didn't want to do it, right? And they didn't accept it, right? And it's unbelief. They just didn't believe it. Yeah. All right. Consider verses 3 through 5. What works is the writer saying were finished from the foundation of the earth? And what is his point? We who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, I swore in my wrath they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. What is he? He has spoken in a certain place the seventh day. In this way, God rested on the seventh day from his works. And again, in this place, they shall not enter my rest. What works is he talking about here that were finished from the foundation of the world? Relate this to the seventh day. Yeah, remember the seventh day, what happened? God rested. From what? From the creation. Yeah, he created the entire universe, and he stopped, and he rested on that day. That's where the Sabbath observance came from, that Moses said, okay, now we're going to be a people of God. We're going to do something that no one has ever done before. We're going to follow the Sabbath. We're going to dedicate Saturday as a day that we have off. We don't do any work. God told him to do that, obviously. But the question we need to ask is, did they, at that point when they started observing the Sabbath, is that when they entered into the rest that God promised? No. How do we know that? Huh? Well, even after they went into Canaan, they started observing the Sabbath. Did that mean that they'd entered the rest? Or the land that Joshua gave them, and they could finally settle into the land according to the promises. How do we know that that was not the rest that God promised? Yeah, it ultimately is. But he gives a point here about how we know. See, the Jewish argument is we've entered into the rest of God because we have received the promises of God. And his argument is that's not true. You haven't entered into his rest. And he had a quotation in there from a certain man that said something that proved they hadn't entered the rest. Well, that's part of it, yeah. The swearing of not entering the rest relates to those people who are wandering in the wilderness. Who is it the one that's quoting that? Or actually the Hebrew writer is quoting this passage. Remember, we've established where the passage was. Psalm 95. Who wrote Psalm 95? Was it Moses? David. How much longer did David live after Joshua? A long time or short time? Long time, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years. So probably 500 to 600 years afterward. Here David is writing, and what's he saying? They haven't entered the rest. He said there still remains a rest for the people of God. So they haven't obviously entered into that rest, or they wouldn't be saying that there's a rest for the people of God, that for them to enter into, right? That's his point. That's the Hebrew writer's point. So when he says they will not enter into my rest, that's what you're saying. And you're right, but I wanted to clarify who was saying it and why. The timing of this is what's important. And so he brings that in about the seventh day in verse 4, also in verse 5, in this place they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains that some must enter it, and those to whom it was first preached did not enter it because of disobedience, he's now saying through David, today, after such a long time, as it has been said, today if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. So now he's telling them, if you want to enter into this rest, don't harden your hearts. Stay faithful to God. That's the point that he's making in chapter 3 as well, right? If you want to enter into the rest, don't harden your hearts. All right, so we've already looked at numbers 5 there and 6. Sorry? That's right. He's helping them to see that this is not a physical place or a physical manifestation of God's promises. It has nothing to do with the seventh day rest. It has nothing to do with the rest that was given to the people of Israel when they entered into Canaan, settled all the property. That's not the point at all. The point is that there's still something we're waiting on. Well, what is that thing we're waiting on? There's no other rest that's been told to us except related to our relationship with God. And that is, we're waiting, like you said, we're waiting for paradise. We're waiting for heaven. That's the rest, okay? So then look at verse 10. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his. What does he mean by that? All right, so this is talking about after our life is over, we enter into his rest, we've ceased from our works. Is he talking about here ceasing from doing what God tells us to do while we're alive? No. You know, a lot of people use this verse to say that that's why we don't do works, because we've entered into the rest. We're saved. We haven't entered that rest yet. Yes. Yeah, Linda? Right. Yeah, and it's something we anticipate, right? We're looking forward to this rest that God has promised to us. Now, in some sense of the word, we have ceased if we're trying to work our way to heaven, but that's really not his point here. His point is not that we're tired from working our way to heaven. His point is that we're entering into the rest that God promised to us, and that is that we're still waiting for, honestly. To some degree, we have it now. It's the same thing with heaven, right? To some degree, we have heaven on earth, and that is in the church, in the kingdom. That is, to some degree, it is that, but it's nowhere near what it's going to be like when we're there. It's just a little taste of it, right? And we can have a little taste of that now because Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest." We can have that now, but the rest that he's talking about is ultimately when we get to be in heaven with God, with Jesus. That's right. You're still doing what you can, right? And we all have diminished capacities at 99, I'm sure. But I don't know if I want to live that long, but I don't know what God has planned. All right, is that the second bell? All right, thank y'all very much. Appreciate your comments.